we might have some people coming in after the fact, but welcome. This is our first spring teaching and learning talk. If you haven't joined us before, these events are meant to sort of get everybody excited about exploring a topic that maybe they're familiar with and they want to go a little bit deeper, or a new topic that they're very interested in. I'm Pablo Yáñez. I am a senior program manager for Steely. With a bunch of other text behind that title. And what's not included in my title, of course, is community programming, which is one of the big tasks that I have every year. So I want to start with just asking this question to you guys. Have you guys used Poll Everywhere before? If you can grab a device or a laptop and go to pollev.com/Pablo. It's the link at the top of the page. And what I'd like to do is ask you a question of how do you feel about providing students actionable feedback and that students are using it constructively? So two axes. That one is that you are uncertain about how you can apply that concept, to confident at the other end of the x-axis. And the y-axis is it is within my control. And I'm sorry, it's kind of, you'll see it on your phone. At the bottom is it's not within my control. So if you could just log in. Oh, look at that. We're a little less clustered than normal. So most of you feel like you're in the comfort zone. We have nobody's in the stress center, which is fantastic. Leave that application open because we're going to do 2 more activities as we go through. So has everybody had a chance to respond? Okay, fantastic. So I am going to be joined by Paul Heidemann, who is Steely's inaugural Emeritus Faculty in Residence, but not until March 1st, right, Paul? So he is here. We've hijacked him and brought him here. And then we are also joined by Ali Blankenship and Amanda Goldstein, who are fantastic partners that we have at Mason School of Business. All PhDs, so we have a star crowd. I am a lowly master, so I'll be the master of ceremonies. Okay, so on today's agenda, we're going to talk, we just did it. We are, where are we on feedback? We're going to have a couple of activities. We're going to have some working definitions and concepts. We're going to talk a little bit about fostering digital literacy and what that concept is. And then we're going to take 2 different perspectives on feedback in our classrooms. One is Paul's take, which is going to talk about coaching individual students on their learning methods, and a general strategy, an example, and addressable issues when providing students feedback. On the other, in the other half of the presentation, Amanda and Ali are going to talk about soliciting mid-course student feedback. So this is feedback that is going from students to faculty members on their teaching. And then they're also going to talk about responding to mid-semester course student feedback. All right. So I wanted to do this activity because this is a comment that I often get from faculty members. So if you go to the Poll Everywhere page, you should now see this poll. The prompt is, given the amount of work I put into giving learners feedback, I am frustrated by how little impact the feedback has. I feel that the impact on my feedback has is proportional to the work that I do. I'm surprised how much positive impact my feedback has. And finally, I think you should have an option for other. So why don't you tell us about how you feel about the amount of work that you put into providing students feedback and how effective that is in affecting change. Okay, so we have a lot of people who are sort of in the middle ground, which makes absolute sense. You value feedback, and maybe you're looking for ways to make it more impactful. Did anybody answer other? I can't see. Oh, let me scroll down. Oh, we did. Does anybody want to share what the other was? There were lots of other answers that I could have thought. about this. Could be that I don't seek much feedback, or I'm time limited. Anybody want to share an other? No? Okay. Does anybody want to talk about why they answered the way they did? Who felt, or does anybody want to explain to us why they felt a little frustrated about feedback?
You have a comment
Okay.
saying from Ken.
Okay.
I answered other because it ranges depending on the student students.
Yep. Yeah, that's a very valid question. Response.
And then there was another one.
Okay.
From Melissa. I'm one of the other responses too. I answered other because the way students interact with my feedback just play a range.
True. Yeah, it's not everybody. Paul's going to address that a little bit. Not everybody reacts to feedback the same way, and that's one of the important concepts that we're going to be talking about. All right, I'm going to keep moving because we have lots after me. So, feedback, right? Take a second, read through this definition. Tell me if you would add something to it, if that kind of hits the spot for what feedback is. Hopefully that's big enough. I didn't realize that the screen was a little bit smaller in this room. Shani, can you read this? Tell me if there's any comments. I'm just saying the people on Zoom are beating you guys in the room right now. Usually they're very quiet. Okay, everybody's good with this general definition? Okay, so one of the things that I want to talk about is feedback and assessment often get joined, and they are not the same thing, right? So they can be used together. For example, in formative assessments, they are often used together, right? You're providing your students feedback on an assessment that you provided, and it's formative. It's helping them improve. So in many cases, they're used together, but they serve different purposes. They're not the same thing. So generally, they are learning-centered for feedback versus evaluation-centered for assessment, right? You're providing information to guide future growth and improvements, gauging performance, and goal completion for assessment. So the purposes of assessment and feedback, while they go in hand, often are not the same thing. Some people often talk to me about how feedback is in the assessment. So you could consider getting a 79% on an exam a form of feedback, but it's pretty skeletal, obviously. Okay, so feedback literacy. Who was familiar with that term before we announced this talk? Okay, so a few of us. This is something that I became interested in. I went to a Harvard Business School presentation that was from a faculty member at the University of San Francisco. Did a great presentation on feedback literacy. And almost at the same time, I was meeting with my son at North Carolina State. He's getting a master's in data analytics. And the first thing they did for all of the incoming students at NC State is they handed them a book that I've got in the back there on basically what is feedback literacy. So feedback literacy is basically, it's a life skill. So it's the ability to understand, process feedback effectively for learning and development, right? So there's a loop there. Both receivers and givers of feedback are part of and need to have some digital literacy. And one of the key components is actively engaging and taking feedback to heart, right? And it has to do with trying to acquire feedback if you're not given it. How do you go about acquiring feedback? And the feedback can come from many different sources. They can come from, in our roles in higher education, they can come from faculty members. They can come from peers. They can come from self-assessment. And I can think of cases where you might be a chemistry professor. The feedback that you're getting might be actually in the physical world, right? You did an experiment, something went wrong, and you have a chance to see what feedback the universe is giving you. It's one of the key components to developing self-regulated learning and achieve continuous improvement. There's a couple of things that we need to do as both providers and recipients of feedback to become sort of feedback literate and be able to use that feedback in a really useful way. For the providers, you want to communicate the value and intent of your feedback. We often don't talk to students about why we are giving them feedback, what the purpose of that feedback is. You want to also create an environment of trust. It's always much easier and much more productive to take feedback from people that you trust rather than people that you're unsure about. Ali and Amanda will be talking about the business school online courses, which is an environment where getting to that environment of trust can be a little bit more challenging and might require a few extra steps. You want to provide clear and actionable feedback. That's always the case. You want to develop feedback loops, that is iteration. Try, feedback, redo, get more feedback. On the recipient end, you want to understand the value and intent of feedback. Often students don't. Often they actually make that mistake of taking feedback as assessment, right? And they're different again. Emotional management. Paul is going to update us on a little bit. I was thinking of it only from the recipient end, and there's actually a component that's from the provider's end. You want to seek actionable feedback, even if it's not given. You want to create a culture where students are asking about additional feedback if they're not getting it. You want to proactively request clarification, that is, have discussions about your feedback. And then you want to reflect on the feedback loop. Did I take that feedback to heart? Did I make changes? Did it provide an improvement? Paul's going to talk about these, but these are some of the key teaching strategies that I think are very important in developing feedback literacy and also for just building classes that are feedback rich and students can grow. So one is designing feedback rich learning tasks. That often goes hand in hand with what is called scaffolding, which I'm guessing you guys are all familiar with. You want to provide actionable and timely feedback, telling somebody that they thought they did a good job. I'm not quite sure that provides the type of feedback that is actionable. You want to promote self-assessment. You want to create a culture where students are thinking about self-regulating their learning and what they need to do. And then finally, dialogue. You want to encourage students to create an environment where dialogue is not just one way, but is part of a discussion. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Paul. You want to use a clicker? Okay. My notes will not fall off.
So I'm in this top left box here on feedback interactions, giving feedback to an individual. We're going to switch down to this one for Amanda and Ali. And I and others work in these other areas too, giving feedback to groups. So as a group, or groups to groups, which is mostly surveys, groups of students giving feedback to groups of faculty. So there are four common settings in which I'm giving feedback to students. One is after exams, and that one I have a handout that Pablo can pass around, and that is a potential takeaway. It's really easy to implement. All you have to do is post it to students or assign it to students, and they can work through it on their own. I've had a small handful of students basically say it transformed their studying. They've never thought about thinking about how they prepare in that way before. So it's not going to reach everybody, but it's a really quick one thing to try. And I'll talk briefly about it later. And for any of these, I'm happy to talk more if anyone wants to email me. The second one is better studying. How do you help students improve their study methods? And on that one, I'm going to run through one example in a little more detail. And again, there's lots more I could talk about. So that's most of what I'm going to talk about today. Oral presentations is the third category. And for that, there's something I didn't figure out for about 20 years here, but now do 1-minute presentations with immediate feedback and only one thing to work on. And then on writing, another thing I only found about 10 years ago, George Gopin's Writing from the Reader's Perspective. I won't talk about 3 and 4 today, but I'm happy to talk about them anytime. So the steps that I have to go through are understanding at least one barrier. And this was stuff I had to learn. When I first came here, I tried giving feedback to students, but I wasn't very good at it. I didn't understand learning barriers that other people had. I didn't have good skills at coaching students and helping them actually act on the things that I was telling them. So even when I had good advice, it still mostly failed because students couldn't follow it. It wasn't actionable. I think I've learned from maybe not every student, but an awful lot of individual students was still learning when I retired last year. So didn't stop. And picked up strategies and ideas from workshops, sometimes from students, from reading, from mentors, and so on. So I need to understand at least one barrier. I need to have a solution, and really critical for students, and it's very hard to do, only one thing at a time. It really helps if I can work collaboratively with them to figure out what is one thing where they might get the most return for their effort. And that's the one thing to focus on until they either want to give up on it or they've mastered it and then go on to something else. And it has to be coachable by me. I have to know enough about it and know enough about the students to coach them on it. Then I need to be able to collaborate with them on a plan, and I need to do follow-up, that is plan and schedule. The exam analysis for after exams or test analysis, I go back and forth on the names. That document is not about what's right or wrong. It's not going back through your exam and going, oh, I got this wrong, what's the right answer? Instead, it's about identifying the things you did to prepare that were related to whether you got an answer right or wrong. So there are 7 categories for every single answer, whether you got it right or wrong. For every single answer, the student goes through and identifies them. The first one is, I didn't think it was important, so I didn't study it. If you're getting a lot of questions wrong because you didn't think it was important to study, then spending more study time is probably not going to help. What you need to get better at is identifying what are the things that are important enough to study. And they go on from there. There are things like, I knew it was important, I studied it, but I didn't remember it on the exam. And so on all the way through. I knew it was important, I studied it, I was able to recall it on the exam, but I made a mistake when I tried it. So those 7 categories, they go through and then tally through the whole exam for each question. What are the categories? And whatever number comes up the highest is telling them things about what they were doing right and or what they were doing wrong. And now they have some clues on, okay, what can I do more of next time that will help fill places where I made the most mistakes? So that's a handout. I also have a PDF, so you can email us to find it. So I want to move on to talk about, if I have a strategy that I know works, this is actually the very first one that I actually got to work reliably with students. And it's to understand that students are doing a lot of passive review. They're just looking at things over and over again. They're watching stuff over and over, rereading things. It's really passive. And we know that doesn't build anything except recognition memory. So I want to change them from passive review to retrieval practice, which is just you try to recall it from memory. And then I want them to organize that a little bit. I want to do the retrieval practice while putting things down on a sheet of paper, which will eventually form a map, somehow related to the concept or the structures or whatever they're talking about. I can explain what it is, how and why it works. I can explain why that's how you build memories, like exercising a muscle, and why just looking at stuff over and over, it's all coming in, you're not exercising anything. It's like trying to get stronger by watching somebody work out. And I can tell them exactly how to start. I can collaborate with them on a clear, achievable plan with just that one thing to do. And I can tell them things about follow-up. For example, I can say, okay, tonight, I'm going to pick one concept, do this, and maybe on your, I told you I want you to do it, and then I want you to repeat with a fresh sheet of paper or whiteboard or whatever. Do it, and I want you to photograph it and send it to me. And I want you to jot a few notes down about how it felt. Did you hate it? Did you like it? Did it feel like it worked? Was it really frustrating? Whatever. A little bit of journaling. So if I'm going to do this, I need this. I'm getting an echo upload.
Sorry.
So if I'm going to do it, I need to actually make sure this could be an issue for the student. I need to check that with the student. So I'm asking questions like, what's going on when you're studying? And are you doing a lot of rereading? Are you doing problem solving? So tell me on a typical day, what are you doing? What do you do after class? What do you do 3 days? For the next part, I'm working on plans with them and I'm checking with them. Will they actually do this? I've even done things like say, okay, if I'm willing to spend 15 minutes with you, helping you figure out what you might do differently, will you promise to spend at least 15 minutes on your own to do this follow-up, to do this, try this out? So I explain what they're doing when they're trying to recall it. I tell them, don't guess, because when you guess, you reinforce the guess. If it's right, great. If it's wrong, you just reinforce the wrong answer. You strengthen the incorrect answer. So when you need to check, but keep trying, start over at the beginning and keep trying to go through the whole thing. Jot things down on paper, turn it into a map, put up, connect things with lines or arrows if it's cause and effect. And that combined with the words that you're going through will help you understand the concept better. I've also said you need an example. I've saved some from other students. So if you want to see what other students have tried, I've got, with their permission, I've got stuff I can show you. I've told them that the first time going through it is going to be the slowest. And each time they do it, the first time is going to be a little faster. And also for any given one, second time, third time, much faster. Often once they've done it a couple of times, they might be able to go through the whole thing in a minute, even for a fairly complex concept. So that's instructions. I jumped ahead there. The follow-up is pick one topic. So either I'll give them a topic or if they don't like that one, pick their own. Journal it in quick notes, how it felt, the time it took, questions, results, what made sense or didn't make sense, what got in your way, what barriers were there. And then as quickly as they're willing to send me feedback, to send me their comments, feedback back to me is tonight or talk tomorrow after class or whatever they'll do. Critical here, getting back to some of what Pablo said, is this is focused, this is feedback that is focused, one thing at a time. It's clear instructions that students can follow. It's actionable, the student will be able to do it. There has to be trust. I'll come back at the very end to some other non-academic barriers. I've had students who were frustrated or angry with me, and then the feedback gets a lot tougher for them to actually use well. But I've had a few, one who was so angry she was shaking sometimes when she came in to talk to me, and we both knew it, although neither of us ever did an overt acknowledgement, but she knew I knew. But she was still able to do it. On the other hand, I've had others who just could not. They were so frustrated with me or angry about something, they couldn't do it. I've had students who were so stressed, they couldn't while I was their instructor. But in a subsequent semester, when I wasn't their instructor, they could come back and get useful feedback. So those other barriers, and that's also the emotional management piece. I've had students I've been pretty frustrated with. By the fourth time somebody misses an appointment, you may be getting pretty annoyed. It doesn't help when you're working with the feedback, especially because there are often reasons you don't know about for somebody to do it now. So how long does this take? The after exams, just post the handout. Doesn't have to take any time at all. I have some classes, I just post the handout. And I either tell them after the exam, I recommend it, or I'm assigning this. Go through it, you can stop at any time, but I would encourage you to do the whole thing. And then a lot of times I'll offer a 15-minute meeting to talk about it after they work through the handout. The improving study methods can be as short as a 15-minute first meeting and then 5-minute follow-ups that might be recording my encouragement or my saying, oh, here's why it didn't work for you. This part I didn't explain clearly enough. I want you to change it in such and such a way. And so pretty variable. And I've had some students that I've had coaching interactions for some places all 4 years of college where they just keep trying new things. Other barriers I'm considering. So over time, I've had enough experience with students to start realizing some of these other barriers really matter. I got better at recognizing them, and I got better at talking with students about them. Even if it's just to refer them to something or to recommend they get to go to somebody who has expertise in the area. Weak background knowledge, that's what I can help them address. But it's really important to recognize that the problem isn't this course. It isn't their study method per se. It's that they came in so far behind everybody else that they just can't go. And that takes a special approach. Maybe it's the pre-class preparation that's getting in the way. Maybe it's what they're doing in class. I've had 3 students with narcolepsy who literally fell asleep on and off during class. And we had to work through very specific strategies to help them get through courses. Poor study methods, exam preparation, exam taking. What are they doing during the exam? I watch students during exams. A few years ago, I had a physiology student on an exam with 8 free-response questions. And she looked at the first question for 30 minutes. And every now and then, she'd raise her pencil and start putting it down on the paper. And then she'd put it back down and think some more. So that's an exam taking issue. Something is going on that's blocking that student from starting. And then she rushed through the whole exam in 15 minutes and actually rather surprisingly didn't do horribly. And then life distractions, all the other things going on in life. And those are strategies that, okay, when your life is crazy, what do you do? Here's a bunch of the techniques I've worked on with students for improvement. How am I doing on time? Do I have to?
Maybe 4 or 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So retrieval practice and with mind and concept mapping, those are 2 of the most important. So they're first. I've had a very small number of students who my diagnosis was, you are treating everything as equally important and you're trying to memorize it all. That's not possible, and you're winding up with a confused mess. So I'm just going to give you this rule. For every class day, you are only allowed to study the 3 things that you decide are most important. I don't care what they are. You're only allowed to study them until you have mastered them. And then once you've mastered them, you can pick another one and study it till you master it. So if you feel there's more than 3, start early. And I've had a few students who've gone from terrible performance to really great performance with that one piece of advice. It is one of the very few things that I've ever found that can help a student improve really quickly. But it's probably, I don't know, I don't think it's any more than 1 in 100 students. Chunking, so when things are big and overwhelming, break them into smaller pieces and learn the pieces first and then fit them together. Causal thinking, a lot of students struggle with cause and effect thinking. And in fact, if I call it causal thinking, they don't get it. I have to say A to B to C to D thinking like dominoes. That first domino has to hit the second domino, which has to hit the next. Each thing has to cause the next to happen. And I want you thinking about it in that way. Causal thinking is a little too abstract. Change one thing problems. Here's this system. Change one thing in it, what would be different? Whether it's in history or literature or whatever, you're just going to increase or decrease or remove something or add something. What might come out differently? If you understand it, you can make predictions about it. Choose an outcome problems. What if you wanted this economic scenario or biological system or story to come out differently? in a particular way, what could you do to make it happen? Or explain to me why it's not possible. Drawing to learn, that's a bunch of the research I'm doing right now is getting students to sketch through things to help them develop models for model-based reasoning. Another one that I'm exploring with some students right now is using hands and body to step through events where you're actually using your hands and body to shape or act through things. Which is something professionals do all the time, at least in my field and a bunch of other ones where I've bothered them to check. But students don't know how to do that. Journaling for self-assessment, understanding your own learning, so just learning how learning works, but not in a typical psychology course, which is oriented toward the user. It's oriented towards studying how learning works, instead something more practical. And then I have an Excel spreadsheet for timing a logical progression of study activities as you're going between one exam and another or leading up to a paper or whatever. Non-academic barriers, time management. And I have an approach for that, stress management. I have some approaches to that. By the way, none of these are counseling. These are, here's something that has worked for other students who are struggling with the same issue. They help them learn in spite of this stuff going on, as opposed to, I have some kind of expertise to fix it, which I absolutely don't. Cell phone management, sleep management, the yawning for attention, or my students who were literally falling asleep in class, 1 minute incredibly engaged and then asleep. And I just said, go talk to your doctor. And then social anxiety, frustration or anger, and there's more that come on. So if those are root problems, then I try to adjust the feedback. Okay. And here I'm going to turn it over to Ali and Amanda, and down in the lower left box.
So there's a slide that's missing there. We were going to do another. Oh, there we go. Yeah, right there. So one more activity. This is geared towards how often you seek student feedback on your own teaching for how courses are going. And we'll just take a second to respond to that. Hopefully everybody still have that open.
Yes.
I like to see that we're looking for feedback at least once per semester. So here we go. Yes, please.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Ali Blankenship. I'm the Director of Program Management and Instructional Quality in the Center for Online Learning at the School of Business, joined by my colleague.
I am Amanda Goldstein. I'm the Associate Director of Instructional Affairs, also at the Center for Program and Business School.
So Amanda and I are going to share our process for supporting instructors on soliciting mid-course feedback and also responding to it. So we'll share some tips and lessons learned. I believe in context matters. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of our program, students, and instructional model because it is a bit unique compared to some of our residential programs. So we do have 5 online master's programs, 3 online graduate certificates. We have a very quick pace with 3 starts per year and 6 7.5 week terms per academic year. We have 53 credit bearing courses across our programs and 150 sections per academic year that are taught by 91 full-time and adjunct faculty. Our programs are designed for working professionals. We currently have about over 500 active students and have graduated 1,300, and we're proud of our retention and student satisfaction. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this slide. So I mentioned that instructional model being a bit unique compared to residential programs. We have 3 instructional roles in our program. So we have a course author who is typically a Mason School faculty member who designs and develops the primary copy of an online asynchronous course in advance of the first offering. And then that primary course, once it's all developed, is duplicated into multiple course sections. And then that course author becomes what we call a faculty lead. And they serve as the instructor of record across all course sections and have access to all course sections. And they supervise the individual sections facilitated by section leads. Those are online adjunct faculty. And we typically have anywhere between 25 to 35 students in a section, and we'll offer anywhere between 1 to 6 sections of a course. So this helps us scale while maintaining an engaging and high quality learning experience for our students. And our section leads, as I mentioned, are online adjunct faculty members. They typically facilitate 1 to 2 course sections, and they are practitioners in the field, usually working full-time jobs outside of their teaching responsibilities or recently retired. And they work as a team together. And so when I was first brought on board in my role, one of my first initiatives was to create comprehensive training development for these various populations of faculty, most specifically for our section leads, because they had the fewest opportunities for training and development given their role, but yet taught such a significant portion of our students. So we wanted to make sure we were providing them with appropriate support and what it means to teach at William & Mary. As part of my dissertation research, I looked into how you intentionally foster a sense of community among online adjunct faculty. And in that research, I found that many institutions have a comprehensive onboarding process for online adjunct faculty that extends all the way until after the term. So we instituted something similar in our online programs where we have activities that happen before a section lead begins teaching for us, at the midterm, which is where we're going to focus on today, as well as end of term and then post term. So it's a continuous process. At the midterm, we instituted 2 things: a informal course observation, where our team goes into a section lead's course and looks at various areas of their course, such as announcements, discussions, grading, and feedback. And that's paired with a module, we call it a module 3 check-in survey. This is a mid-course feedback survey, in which we put that in their course of any newly hired section leads for students to give feedback about their experiences. So these 2 processes together really complement one another, where we can see the feedback coming through from the student's perspective and do a deeper dive into the course, provide affirming feedback when the section lead is doing well, as well as some coaching on how to improve. And so we're going to talk specifically about that check-in survey. And so there's a lot of value of soliciting mid-course feedback. It encourages students to share their experiences, and it boosts engagement. There's a lot of research to support that. Soliciting feedback mid-course, students are more likely to respond because they feel that that feedback can then change the remainder of the course. And we've actually found that to be true. We receive higher response rates, often 70+% for our mid-course surveys compared to our end-of-course surveys. I mentioned we have working professionals, they're adult learners. Once the term is done, they pretty much moved on, so they're not as likely to provide feedback. But those high response rates really do offer deeper insights compared to our student course evaluations. And it's really a proactive approach to identifying and addressing any issues early on. It also responds to our section leaders' request for more feedback. They were really thirsting for more feedback along the way as throughout their teaching experience. And with the feedback received, it provides an opportunity not only for us, but the faculty leads supervising them to clarify instructional expectations, to clarify certain aspects of the course. So it's a win-win overall. And so when we were thinking about instituting this survey, we piloted it in the academic year 2021. And so we started slow, but we wanted it to be short and concise with a mix of quantitative and qualitative questions. We wanted students to be able to complete it fairly quickly, but get at the heart of what we really wanted to know. We did develop this in collaboration with a few faculty leads, and it was informed by examples from other institutions. We looked at a variety of mid-course surveys and sort of combined and pulled from questions we really liked and made it specific to our instructional model. We intentionally placed it at 3 weeks into the course. So I mentioned earlier that our courses are 7.5 weeks long. There's weekly modules that are a week long, with the last one being a week and a half. And that 3 week mark, we played around with 4 weeks, 2 weeks. The 3 week mark is enough time for the student to have had enough engagement with their instructor, enough time for grading and feedback. that they could actually provide some constructive feedback. And same with our course of observation, that gave us enough things to look at within their course to provide some more actionable feedback. The 3-week placement is also after add drop, but before the withdrawal deadline. And we looked into a variety of platforms, but we decided to use Qualtrics because of its customizable features and robust reporting capabilities. We, since we're the ones managing it, we needed to be able to have really customizable reports. And that link to the Qualtrics survey is shared within the course. And so as far as the questions, they're a little tiny here, but this slide deck will be shared afterwards so you can look into them. But we have 2 Likert skill questions focusing on course design with an open-ended question where students can provide, elaborate on why they chose the specific answers, as well as 3 questions about the section lead and their interactions with that section lead, with another open-ended question. Our section leads are not responsible for the course design, so there's usually some debate about whether we should include that or not with the faculty lead, but we found that when we remove the course design questions, students still provide feedback about it anyways. So we may as well just go ahead and collect it and use that data to inform future course offerings, and that gives the faculty lead an opportunity to clarify with students the intent behind some of the course design. And it also allows us to just, again, get that pulse check on how things are going in the course. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Amanda to talk through more about the survey.
Great, thank you, Allie. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the logistics of the survey and the distribution process. So as she mentioned, it is required part of the onboarding process for our new section leads. They're introduced to this survey during their orientation, so they know that it's coming. And we find that faculty leads, after they're first introduced to this survey, if they have a new section lead, they keep it term after term, even when all their section leads are experienced. Because we all have the understanding that every term you have a different group of students with different needs and expectations. And so they find the feedback valuable, even if all of their section leads are experienced. So in terms of the actual logistics, as Allie mentioned, it is during module 3 or week 3. And it's available in the course for 1 week for them to be able to click on the link and access the survey and provide their feedback. Now, in terms of supporting the faculty, we provide them reminders that the survey is about to open. We provide them example announcements to help get their students engaged and actually provide feedback. And one thing that we want to start incorporating in the future is including more information in those announcements, giving students really good guidance on what type of feedback will result in meaningful change. And so just like how we're supporting the faculty in providing them the service and the survey and the opportunity for feedback, those same faculty also need to provide support to the students to make sure that the information they're receiving is actually meaningful and actionable. So some of the things that we've thought about providing to our faculty to give them some ideas of what to include in that announcement are listed here on this slide. So telling students to be thoughtful in their comments, going beyond just the Likert skill questions, making sure they actually include comments, being specific, so avoiding general statements like the discussions are great, and actually specifying why are they engaging, or maybe why are they or not. Balancing positive and constructive feedback. So acknowledging what works well in addition to maybe what needs to be improved. Focusing on learning and engagement. So highlighting the aspects that help or hinder their learning. Offering solutions. So again, just being very specific that if a student is facing a specific challenge, offering a possible solution, maybe even something they've experienced that went well in another course. We've seen that a lot in the survey feedback. Avoiding personal criticism. So making sure that they remember that there's a person on the other end of this feedback, and to make sure that any kind of feedback that they're providing is about the instructional experience and not the person themselves. And then also highlighting engagement and interaction. So sharing whether or not they feel connected with the course and their peers. So finding some ways to help inform our faculty on how to include this guidance in their announcements will result in better feedback ultimately that they receive. Now, as Ali mentioned, we did choose Qualtrics because of its reporting feature. It's one of the many reasons why we chose that tool. This gives you just a quick snapshot of an example report that we provide. And what's important about this is it provides the individual section lead information about their feedback, but also in relation to how well they're doing across the sections in comparison. Now, in terms of responding to the mid-course feedback, this is where we really try to take that next step. We don't just provide the section leads with the feedback, we also provide them guidance on how to respond to it. So we created a resource that is on our My Mason SharePoint site that we share with the report when we send that out. We also integrate it into our faculty development, so it's discussed in the orientation for section leads and in the orientation for faculty leads. And we also make it easily accessible throughout the year with reminders that go out in our biweekly newsletter to our faculty, and then also pointing to it on My Mason periodically. Now, to give you a glimpse of what is in this resource, we walk a faculty member through the process of analyzing the feedback and then responding to it. So starting first with analyzing feedback, we walk them through the idea of first understanding that this is a student's perspective of their interactions with them. We ask them to look at both the strengths and areas for improvement. So again, bringing that balanced approach. Sorry, I'm losing my and then also recognizing where there are common themes where they can begin to prioritize what they want to focus on for future improvements. The next critical piece is communicating their response to their students. So actually circling back, creating that feedback loop that we talked about earlier today, and telling the students, I hear you, I see where common themes are coming through, this is what I'm going to prioritize, and this is how we're going to move forward in the term. Explaining the rationale behind any changes that they're going to make and any changes that they can't make, whether it's because it's about course design and that's outside the purview of that section lead, or because there are other reasons. Then actually implementing those changes. So making adjustments to their course delivery, the course design if appropriate, and then also monitoring the impact of those changes over time. Reflecting on that feedback. So now look at your end of term course evaluations. Do you see a difference in the type of feedback coming through? Assess the effectiveness of whether or not those changes actually made tangible improvements, and then plan for how you're going to make future improvements. So sorry. And then finally, seeking continuous improvement. So we provide them with a whole list of ways that they can continue seeking out training and development, the different resources that we provide in our center, and then beyond, like Steely and other entities across campus. All right, so for some final key takeaways for mid-course feedback, these are just some things to keep in mind if you want to incorporate this type of feedback soliciting into your courses. One is to plan ahead. It takes a lot more time to collect and analyze and actually respond to feedback than one might think, because you want to be intentional about it. Anytime we want to collect feedback, we want to make sure we're then using it in a meaningful way, because that's how you continue to build trust with your students. You want to keep it concise. We have found that short focus surveys really do yield better results because students can quickly provide their feedback, and then you can also analyze it in a timely manner. Balancing the question types using both quantitative and qualitative prompts, making sure that you can have some hard data that you can then track term over term, but then also making sure you have that qualitative information to really provide you the insights behind those more quantitative questions. Guiding constructive feedback, that's where we talked about adding in those clear instructions to students to provide them with more guidance on how to provide meaningful feedback. Reviewing the feedback thoughtfully, so really sitting down and considering where are your strengths, where are your areas for improvement. Acknowledging and acting, so sharing the takeaways and communicating those planned changes with your students, and then finally following through. So just in conclusion, I really do want to reinforce that collecting mid-course feedback is really important for your students, not only in building a trust, but then also kind of mirroring the very first information we learned in today's session about that difference between feedback and assessment. So with that, I'll just end there. Thank you. Huh?
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Amanda and Allie and Paul. So let's turn it over to questions. I think that wrapped up so beautifully because I'm not sure if you guys were thinking about feedback literacy.
Yes, can I ask a question about this specific?
Absolutely,
section?
yeah.
You mentioned a drop off between mid-course feedback and end of course feedback. What scale of drop off are we talking about?
Like it goes down to about 30%.
Okay, okay. But still, I mean, that's 30% is still 7%.
Yeah, I mean, anything with the way our course evals are set up, if it has 3 or fewer, it doesn't generate a report. So you can't even get feedback, even if only 2 students responded. But often we only have a handful of students out of a course section of 25, and then you just don't have enough to really make. You don't know if that's just a student expressing grievances or what, whereas the mid-course survey, we get really rich, not only quantitative, but a lot of qualitative feedback to open-ended. I mean, sometimes it's 80+%.
I know you noticed an improvement in like the quality of the feedback since you implemented the guidance for students about.
We had to implement it.
Okay.
This workshop actually, as we were talking and brainstorming, we were like, we should do this. We should provide more guidance because the current prompt we have, we tell them to be constructive, but we think we need more specific. Yeah, because sometimes we don't get it. We get qualitative feedback that's just not helpful to the instructor.
Allie, anecdotally, have you had a chance to touch base with students after, as the semesters progress, to see if they feel like their feedback has improved things?
I mean, it comes through the course eval sometimes. We can see if there's noticeable change, if we get enough responding to it. And then we can, with actually, if the faculty like, keeps the survey in the course term over term, we can see term over term.
And I think what Allie and Amanda are talking about is much more challenging than often it is in face-to-face classes where you are sort of getting continuous feedback on how the class is going, how things are going. At the end of the slide deck, we're sharing some resources, and among them, Steely has a mid-semester survey that you could deploy in any class on campus. But you guys, this is an amazing job.
Yeah, we, went back and forth, or should we put this on something that instructors should do themselves, but we didn't want to put a whole lot of work in the classroom sections. We wanted to manage that part for them and then give them the data to do this. So it is not part of their evaluation, it's really to inform their practices, so.
Yes.
My question is sort of general about the topic. No, it's not specific, but in the presentations. I'm here because this was my last semester is my first semester as a faculty member here. And I did a mid-semester check-in survey, and I also, got my first evaluations. And the challenge that I really want to talk about is how to process it as an instructor in terms of like understanding what you can and can't respond to. And I can see with the way you've done your survey, like seems like you have a way to guide instructors. But I wonder if there's like just sort of general feedback about, for instance, when I did the mid-semester check-in, I designed it myself. I didn't know there was a template, and it was just like so all over the place. Like every single student seemed to have a completely different need. And so it was, and then I remember emotionally going into class after reading that. I felt like almost embarrassed to see the students because like I didn't know how to respond to all these different needs, or I just felt like they had just sort of told me all kinds of stuff that I maybe didn't really want to know at that moment.
50% of it wasn't even about your class. You're just like I'm going through it.
Or
right now.
I just couldn't, like, it wasn't helping me in that moment. like, should continue the class, you know what I mean? Like, because it can be emotionally challenging to know that they hate when you lecture, but you have to lecture, you know? Like, all my classes are lectures, I hate lectures, well, what can I do about that? I'm sorry.
Well, I think Paul has a little bit.
So I've done a lot of mid-semester evaluations. I actually have a long form that asks 25 questions. I just tell students, you have to go to a separate Qualtrics site and say, answer the question or respond to the question of, I have completed the survey or don't have time to do it this semester. And it doesn't tell them which one, so they're anonymous. And I sometimes get 100% response rates with that. One of the things I found, because I've had other faculty use the same thing, one of the things that really helps for the first time, especially, is having a mentor go through with somebody who's done this. So I've done this with a lot of junior faculty. You might see if there's somebody in your department that does it. You certainly talk to us. Because there's a lot of, it's exactly as you say, there's a lot of stuff that's not relevant. And a mentor often has looked at so many of them and say, ignore these, ignore these, ignore these. And then here, you know, here's patterns I see, here's the things that you address, and then here's one or two ideas you can go back and see. And then you have a chance to talk about it with a mentor in advance to find out how much work will this be. Can I actually implement this change that I think the students would like? And have somebody who can say, here's what I think.
And I think that also goes to what we talked about, making, both providing and seeking actionable feedback. So I hate lecture. Maybe digging deeper and, you know, what do you know, how are the lectures providing you with the information you need? Is it too fast? Is it too slow? There's ways to get that feedback to be more actionable. And as one of your slides showed, one of the keys about this is to aggregate and find commonalities in feedback, right? Because it can be all over the place. And a little bit to this, you know, one of the things about feedback literacy, and I typically don't like these terms that are sort of copyrighted, is that there's a loop there, right? So, and it works the same for you and me, and it works for somebody. I'm not sure, are you, your staff, so you're here maybe for your employees or for how you, so it's a life skill, right? So the how you look at that feedback, as Paul mentioned, sometimes it's really important to focus on just one thing. You can't address it all at the same time, right? So maybe you find that commonality in, I don't know how big your classes are. Paul was probably teaching 80 or bigger.
Anywhere from 20 to 200.
Yeah.
I do think there's such value though in Amanda's point about like just acknowledging, I've read your feedback and there are some things that we can change moving forward. I can't change the format of the class. I can't make it not an 8 a.m. Like this is just when we're together. But like these are the things I'm going to change from that. I think it improves your relationship with your students. Like they vented, it hurt your feelings probably because it's such a vulnerable thing to ask for feedback. But then like you're still building trust and relationship with them by saying, like, I read this, I heard you, here's the
Or
things I can change.
And even to take it a step further, then maybe you can also not just acknowledge that you read it, but you can be transparent. You can say, here are the things that I'm going to try to address for the rest of the semester.
Yeah.
And some things you might not be able to address that semester, you know, some stuff is gone, it's in the rear view mirror, and it's valuable feedback for the next time you offer the class. But I think being transparent in what you're trying to do in terms of, I've heard your feedback, I got your feedback, I can't address it all, but here's 2 or 3 things that in the rest of the semester I think are important. That one. Does anybody else have any questions for Paul's part of the presentation, sort of traditional student feedback aspects?
I'm curious, that just made me think about the mode in which I request feedback. Should that be mirrored in the way that I provide it? So often when I'm doing this semester, you know, I'm asking students to write something down, but I'm saying it to them out loud, like, here's class, here's the slide, I'm gonna say some things, but I'm wondering if there's value in sort of mirroring that it's gonna be a written response to what, writing back to them, or am I giving you know, I was hearing you say, talk mostly about individualized, right? So you're meeting one-on-one with the student to give them feedback on their self-assessment, but just like
Yeah.
different modes of responding to feedback that they're sharing.
Yeah, my group feedback tends to be me having my iPad and having images of student work that's anonymized, and then just walking through it with a voiceover and my pen, marking it up to say, okay, here are the kind of things to do. They're always good ones. Here are the kind of things to do. Here's something that would have made it worse. So doing that, trying to do less of that. And I hadn't thought about trying to mirror it. I don't really think I could, because the class is intended to give a lot of information to the group.
Right.
Whereas the one-on-one feedback is not at all like this.
Any questions? Shawnee, were you watching the chat? I didn't see anything come in from our chat folks, our Zoom folks. Well, thank you so much. If you have a couple more minutes, we'd like to ask the same question as you're leaving, just to see if we've made a little bit of an impact and how you're viewing feedback, whether you feel like you're more certain or uncertain about applying the concept, or whether it's within your control or outside. Everybody's in the comfort zone. It's really challenging. I mean, you know, especially online classes, when you're teaching over 100 students, it can be a lot to wrap your mind, because you do want to provide individualized feedback. There is that component of building trust, right? I love that you guys are doing this midterm. If you do it too early, that sense of trust isn't maybe there, and maybe that feedback is not as actionable and productive. Thank you for coming. Let us know if you have any questions. We're going to provide the slide deck, and the resources are going to be at the end of this. There's a couple of books and articles that I think are really good, and we also have the Studio for Teaching Steely's mid-semester survey link provided there as well. Thank you all.